Okay, so this morning we're going to start our study through the book of Genesis. I'm going to start it this morning and it will go through Easter Sunday. So we will be in Genesis through Easter. Jude and Kathy, we're going to welcome Kathy teaching here on Sunday mornings. So Kathy and Jude and I will kind of carry the study of Genesis, and actually Abby, if you have a Genesis text, you're welcome to pull it out. But then, you just do what you feel led to do. But I really want to urge you guys to start reading through Genesis in your devotional time. If you don't have a daily devotion, I would encourage you to use this as an opportunity. Oh, you know what else, Jeff? I apologize. Go ahead and turn the mains on too. These chandelier things, that's now. Let there be light. That's part of the teaching this morning. But if you don't have some kind of structured devotional, this is a great opportunity. If you start, there's 82 days between now and Easter Sunday. 82. There are 50 chapters in Genesis. If you read one chapter a day, and even if you miss several days along the way, you will have read through Genesis by Easter Sunday. And for those of you who come here, you know this is what we do. We teach through books in the Bible. So those who've been here the whole time since I started, we've studied through Acts, 1 Corinthians, the Gospels. We didn't choose a Gospel, but we spent, at least 3 months on the Gospels. Now we're doing Genesis, and when we're done with Genesis, after Easter Sunday, we'll start the letter to the Hebrews, New Testament Hebrews. So if you can read along with what we do in church, you're going to be reading through the Scriptures. Now, it's not at a tremendously fast pace, but I would encourage you to start reading Genesis. That way, when you hear us speak on Genesis, you will have already read it. So if you start today or tomorrow, you will be on course to keep up with us, because next Sunday I'll do the story of Cain and Abel and the entrance of rebellion and sin into the human race. And then I can't remember what the next one is. Noah. But Noah, that's right. So Kathy will bring Noah, which is chapters 6 through 9, I think. And if you read one chapter a day, man, you're going to be doing it. You're going to follow us. And I just think that it's a way to help you grasp and learn better on through what we do on Sunday mornings. Okay. Now, unfortunately, I'm still not done with my introduction. I want to give you a note about my methodology when it comes to Genesis. And Jude and Kathy and I haven't even talked about this. Their methodology may be different from mine, which is fine. We want you to get a different flavor from everything we do, because none of us have the perfect method or solution. My method is that I don't typically go through the stories in Genesis verse by verse. My main goal is to give you what I think is the meta message of the text. What is meta message? It's the message that is overarching of the text. What is the main point of the text? That's the meta message. Now you need to understand, Genesis is a different genre of literature than anything we've done thus far in our church. It's not like Paul's letter to the Romans. It's not even like the gospel material. It is a quite different genre of literature. It's not meant to be a science textbook. It's not meant to present systematic theology. Genesis is not even a history text. There is historical data in the book, but it's not meant to be a history text. Especially the first 10 or so chapters were initially spoken by a tribal leader in oral tradition. They are stories taught to people. And by the way, you've heard me say stuff like this over and over and over, and I'm sorry, but if it's redundant, but we need to get it in our heads. Most of the time, the tribal leader telling the stories in Genesis was illiterate. Mostly it's going to be a man, and he is usually illiterate. He can't read or write. And the people he's telling the story to are illiterate. Okay? Unless he's a formally trained priest or scribe, he's telling stories. Very similar to what many of us grew up hearing in Sunday school. You know, I first heard the creation story in Sunday school. I heard the story of Noah and the flood in Sunday school, told to me in story form. And that's what Genesis is. Now, once you get to Abraham, things become a lot more historically oriented, and the story becomes much more cohesive because you begin to track one man and his lineage through the book. Okay? So that's the methodology that I want you to understand that I take. Now, again, that doesn't mean that Jude and Kathy are going to do. I don't know what they're going to do, and I'm okay with that. But here's my point. Genesis is a profound text. Simple. You know, what is profound? What is profundity? What does it mean for something to be profound? One definition is deep truths or wisdom taught in a very simple format. That is usually what something is when it's profound. It's simple, but you read it and you're like, oh wow, that's amazing. And that's what Genesis is. It's profound stories meant to teach us truths about life and about God. But my method, and one of the reasons that I wanted to open up with this simple explanation of my method, is that I want you to try not to get caught up to strain for every point in the text of Genesis and try to make every single point mean something in particular, or we got to figure it out. Because that's not how it was initially transmitted. Like I said, it was a tribal leader telling stories to illiterate people so that they would know the story of their tribe moving forward from generation to generation. All right, let's pray. Make sure and the reason I say don't get caught up to strain every detail is it's very easy to miss the meta message when you do that. It's very easy to miss the main point when you're trying to figure out every little nitpicky detail. Okay? All right, let's pray, and then we're going to go. Lord, help us. Help me. Help us. Speak to us through the simple truths of your word. In Jesus' name, amen. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Here's how I like to read that first famous verse. I mean, that's famous, is it not? Here's how I like to read it. In the beginning. In the beginning, God. In the beginning, God created. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Man, just think about that, you guys. How profound that one statement is. I don't know, I've been living this text for the last 3 weeks because we made our decisions about Genesis a couple months ago, and I knew I would start, and when I knew I was going to start with creation, so unfortunately this has been like rolling over in my heart and mind for like 3 weeks, and you guys are going to get the result of that. I hope it's decent. But when I read, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, and you know what I just remembered, Jeff, that I messed up and we didn't do the Apostles' Creed. Is it available to us? All right, let's stand up together and we're going to do the Apostles' Creed. I apologize that, we don't have a printed order of service, as it's pretty obvious. So this is the historic Christian creed that we want to say this morning. Join me. I believe in God the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth, and in Jesus Christ, his only Son, our Lord, who was conceived by the Holy Spirit, born of the Virgin Mary, suffered under Pontius Pilate, was crucified, dead, and buried. The third day he rose from the dead. He ascended into heaven and sits at the right hand of God the Father Almighty. From there he will come to judge the living and the dead. I believe in the Holy Spirit, the Holy Catholic Church, the communion of the saints, the forgiveness of sins, the resurrection of the body, and life everlasting. Amen. You can be seated. My apologies, I was supposed to do that before I ever started. Okay, and the reason I wanted to do the Apostles' Creed, besides the fact that we hadn't done it in a long time, is when I read in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, I think of the first line of the Apostles' Creed. I believe in God the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth. How many of you have heard the phrase ex nihilo? Okay. Come on, let me see your hands. Ex nihilo. Okay. It's a Latin phrase that means from nothing. And it's anyone who studies any kind of Christian theology is going to be presented with creatio ex nihilo. Creation from nothing. And that's my first point that I want to present to you that I believe is the meta message of the creation story of Genesis. God has created all things from nothing. Now, there are plenty of Christians who don't really believe that. I just, in my studies, looked up a couple of well-known Old Testament scholars. One guy has just put out a book called Ex Nihilo, where he argues that that's not what is being communicated, and I read some of the other scholarly articles arguing with him, and I would argue against his view. But it's a Latin phrase, and you know, if you go and you search ex nihilo on Google, you're going to find tons of books, papers, and websites talking about this. The earliest Christians believed in ex nihilo. Now, because it's Latin, it's not the way the earliest Christians, it's not the phrase the earliest Christians used, because they spoke either Aramaic or Greek. Latin doesn't come in for a couple hundred years. But the concept was believed by the earliest Christians. The earliest Christians, and again, I'm saying things that you guys have heard me say over and over again, the earliest Christians used the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Hebrew Jewish scriptures. Even the Jews in the first century who were in the Christian movement, even the ones who spoke Aramaic, like the Apostle Paul, and he probably read Hebrew, he writes in Greek. And when he quotes the Old Testament, he quotes the Septuagint, not the Hebrew verses. Therefore, the Septuagint is very important for early Christianity. Now, the Septuagint, when it was handed to the early church, because Septuagint was, translation occurred, I think, in the 2nd or 3rd century before Christ. Do you remember in Jamnia? Is that right? Or somewhere? I can't remember. When it was handed to the early Christians, it included what we call the Apocrypha. Most of the Apocrypha was in that body of literature. In that body of literature, the Maccabees, telling the Jews and rehearsing the Maccabean revolt and the war that occurred between the Maccabees and the Seleucids, the kingdom that was in Syria at the time. I want to read you an incredibly important verse from 2nd Maccabees that the earliest, and by the way, the Apostle Paul alludes to Maccabees 3 or 4 times in his letters. I didn't know this until, I didn't know this until I did my PhD work. Why? Because I'm a good Protestant. And I never read the Apocrypha because I was told not to. I was told it was bad. Don't read it. We miss so much history from not reading the works in the Apocrypha. So if you are inclined to read Maccabees, I would actually encourage you to do it. It's how we know the Maccabean Wars, is the Maccabees and Josephus. But I think Maccabees is probably what he leans on because it's written before he lived. But I want you to listen to this, because the early church writers and the early church, the apostles and the early church writers after the apostles, I believe, knew this concept. This is 2 Maccabees chapter 7, verse 28. Look at the heavens and the earth and see all that is in them. Then you will know that God did not make them out of existing things. God did not make the universe out of things that already existed. What is that? That's ex nihilo. It's just not in Latin. And that's the early belief. And we have a great text in the New Testament, the opening of John's Gospel. In the beginning was the Word, Logos, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. And then verse 3, through Him, through Logos. That's how come we know Logos is referencing Jesus, is because the writer then uses the pronoun for he or she, and it's obviously a he. Through Him, all things were made. And then the last phrase is ex nihilo. Without Him, nothing was made that was made. So the first point I want you to grasp from Genesis is we believe, Christians have always believed, that God created everything from nada, from nothing. Once, and it's hard to conceive of, isn't it? It's hard to conceive of nothing existing. Somehow, that's what I believe. That God spoke it and it just, boom, it happened. Now, I don't want to take more than a few minutes after doing all that to address why I believe in creation as opposed to evolution, but I do want to make a few statements about it. Some of you might know, and if you don't, now you will learn. I grew up the son of a NASA space engineer. I'm the son of a rocket scientist. So I grew up in a non-Christian home, believing in evolution. I mean, I remember in 6th grade, I made the little clay heads of Cro-Magnon man and Neanderthal man, and, you know, what is it, the Piltdown man or whatever, you know, I had the little heads on the, made of wax or made of clay. So consequently, when I think of God creating, and I think of Him creating ex nihilo, my mind immediately goes to the stars, to the planets, to the universe, and the amazing world that we live in. I can't take a whole long time, and there are people who've done a much better job. I was made aware of this last night when I was sharing it with someone I won't name. Made me aware that this has been done a lot better than what I'm going to do it this morning, but I'm only going to take 5 minutes, so I'm cramming it in here. The uniqueness of our earth. And I want to mention 3 things. The earth travels in an elliptical orbit around the sun. I think I have a slide of it, if Jeff can pop it up there. You know, it doesn't go around the sun in a circle. It's an elliptical orbit. So sometimes it's closer to the sun, and then it swings around and it's further from the sun. And that elliptical orbit, every rotation changes. Did anybody know that? It moves ever so slightly, and it moves in a cycle of like, what's up there, 400,000 years. Somewhere between 100,000 and 400,000 years. They calculate this. How can they calculate anything like that? Can someone tell me? How can they calculate cycles like this? Because there's some other ones that I'm going to mention. How can they do that? I'll tell you how. Because the universe runs like the best watch that anyone could ever fathom. It's like the best computer you've ever seen. It runs perfectly. Sorry, I got fired up there, but that's why I believe in creation. And I'll give you more in a minute. The elliptical orbit keeps the earth from being too close to the sun. It gets close and then it swings away. And then it gets close and it swings away. The tilt of the earth, not only is it going around the sun, it's tilted on its axis. So that, it spins. Why is that? Because if Alabama sat there and went around the sun like that, we would be crispy critters. We would burn up, and we would burn up fast. So God made this thing, and I'm just saying it. God made it this way. The earth tilts, it spins, and then it rotates around, and not only that, but it wobbles. The spinning of the world is like a top. It literally wobbles like this I can't even do it. It's crazy. And all those 4 things keep the earth in a cycle that's constant of heating and cooling. And it's what led to the enormous diversity of life on this planet. We have plant life, we have animal life, we have humankind, in ways that are not anywhere. I mean, from the time I was a little kid, I was taught that there are other worlds out there like the earth and other inhabitants of that world. And since I've been alive, we've sent out Genesis to collect stardust. We sent out Voyager 1, which is now in interstellar space. Voyager 1 has exited our solar system. Voyager 2 went right behind it, and it's about to enter interstellar space. We've been shooting radio waves out into the universes ever since I was a little boy. We sent out the Hubble Space Telescope, which is probing as far as we can know. And guess what? We haven't found anything remotely like the earth. We haven't found any life anywhere. Now, if we do, that doesn't mean God didn't create it. I'm reminded of the famous Larry Norman song. How many of you have heard of Larry Norman? The father of Christian rock music. And he sings in one of his songs called UFO. And if there's life on other planets, then I'm sure that he must know. And he's been there once already and has died to save their soul. Oh. My apologies to you, and I will repent to the Lord at a later date of my silliness. Okay. What's the point? The point is, we live in a world where life exists in a way that the likelihood is that we will never find another place like Earth. That's the likelihood, in my opinion. And in addition to the things I just told you, we have an atmosphere that's 12 miles deep, and it blocks 1 billionth of the radiation of the sun. 1 billion. 1 billion. If it let in 2 billionths, or how do you say that? We would probably burn up. So we live and exist in a universe that is unique. And I believe that it points to the Creator. He made it out of nothing. And some of you know this as well, in my travels and my teaching time at the university, I have a propensity to saddle up near scholars who are not in my field about topics that I have questions with, the scholarship that I read, because I read studies out of all kinds of disciplines. I've told stories about me and the geneticist at NC State. Well, I've talked to 2 professors at 2 different universities who teach evolutionary theory, and as I question them about these things, and I ponder, I can give them probing questions, and I'm not there acting like I know better than them. They know more than I'll ever know about biology and about all this kind of stuff. But I know enough to ask them difficult questions, and both of them admitted to me that they believe in a creator. They said, I'm a theistic evolutionist. Because knowing everything we know about this planet and this universe and life as we know it, the odds of it happening in a big bang are so remote that I can't believe it. And this was not a Christian. Neither of these guys were Christians. And they knew I was. But they said, I believe in a higher power, and I believe a higher power sparked. They would say, I believe the evolutionary process, but I believe that it required a spark from something external to humanity to make it work like it works. Listen, it's a lot easier for me, and I grew up believing in evolution. It's a lot easier for me to believe that God created ex nihilo than that we had this big bang and that we have this unbelievable complexity to our world. Forget the universe. As you guys have seen, hopefully, some of the things I've used on our website and in Facebook. I love the Hubble telescope, and so I'll snatch images from their website. Actually, everything I just told you about elliptical and all that kind of stuff I get from NASA. I like NASA's website. What can I say? I'm a NASA junkie, I guess. So that's my first point, ex nihilo. My second point, actually I got it from NASA and from space.com. That's another good website. My second point is the importance of the 7th day. In creation, we're told a story God creates, in the first 6 days, he creates the lights, one to govern the day, one to govern the night. Then he creates the oceans. Then he creates the land. Then he creates all the critters that live in the ocean, all the fish and sea creatures and, scallops, which I can't eat anymore. I love scallops. Then he creates plants and insects on the land. And then he creates mammals. And at the end of the 6th day, he creates mankind, Adam and Eve. Okay, at the end of the 6th day. At the end of each point, at the end of each creative act, the text says that God observed what he had done and that it was good. At the end of the 6th day, he observes man, the creation of mankind, humans, and the text says, he said it was very good. So after 6 days of full creation, the text says that God rested on the 7th day. And it's the beginning of a principle that I believe is part of the meta message. That there's a seventh day principle in our faith. The Jews observed it as the Sabbath or the Shabbat. It was a day where you weren't supposed to work, you were supposed to worship, and you were supposed to think and contemplate of the universe and God and his creation and your relationship to him. It gets carried over into Christianity. The earliest Christians were Jewish, so they observed the Sabbath, and then they met on Sunday morning, the day of the Lord, to commemorate the resurrection. Slowly the church migrates and becomes less and less Jewish. It becomes more and more Gentile, and Sunday becomes the 7th day principle for early Christianity. Now, we have to work. Maybe I should restate that. We get to work. I referenced that in my closing comments to worship. Work is not a result of sin. I've heard this taught, that because of sin, we all have to toil and work. No. Adam had a job in the story. Adam had a job to tend God's garden before the fall. Work is our opportunity to participate with God's creative actions. We get to recreate when we work. And all of us have different skill sets that enable us to recreate or to create in God's process. So, the reason I bring up work is because a very important aspect of the 7th day is that we're taught through the Jewish tradition that you shouldn't work every day of the week. And when we take a day where we do not work, now admittedly in antiquity, you had to work in order to get your food, right? If you were a hunter-gatherer, or you raised crops, or you raised livestock, and that's what you ate. And you had to eat, so you had to work. Nowadays, we're a little bit removed from that. Now we work and we get a little paycheck, and now we don't even actually have the paycheck handed to us. We look at our bank account, which is on our phone, and it's miraculously the money's in there, so that we can then go to the grocery store and we can buy the things that at one time we would raise, in our yard. And I remember growing up as a kid, every Sunday, my great-grandmother would go out into the backyard and grab one of the chickens and cut its head off and pull all the feathers out, put it in a pot, boil it, and then she would cut it all up and fry it, and she made great fried chicken. We had it every Sunday. Somebody had to kill that chicken every Sunday. One time my great-grandmother was gone on a trip, and my grandmother, who just died at 108 years old, by the way, got my uncle, who at the time was 4 years old. My grandmother didn't have the heart to lop the chicken's head off. And she went and got my uncle, who was only 4 years old, and she held the chicken down on the stump, handed a 4-year-old the axe, and said, "Okay, Frankie, now drop the axe right there on the chicken." We don't have to do that anymore. How many of you have ever, and I know some of you might hunt, and I would be happy, how many of you have ever killed what you then ate? Okay? I think that's a good thing. It gets us closer to what our ancestors of old had to do. I don't want to do it, but I think it's good that you guys did it. But work, when we take a day, the seventh day principle is we're telling ourselves, we're affirming that God takes care of us and that we don't have to work every single day. We don't have to live our lives consumed with being a consumer. That we take a day where we focus on God and His kingdom, where we rest. Every one of us are physically in need of not working one day a week. Get your mind clear. Now look, we're not told in the New Testament you have to observe a seventh day. In fact, in Acts chapter 15, when the Jewish believers in Jerusalem were telling Paul and Barnabas what to tell the Gentiles, they did not mention the Sabbath. We are nowhere commanded to do a Sabbath day in the New Testament, but it's a principle that's laid down in creation. And it's carried through by the Jewish tradition and then the early church, and today Sunday is like the seventh day principle. The earliest Christians called Sunday the eighth day to separate the concept of the seventh day being the Sabbath. They called Sunday, which was technically the first day of the week, they called it the eighth day of perfection, illustrated by the resurrection of Jesus. And so as time goes on, the Christians begin to stop working as much as they can. They stop working on Sunday. It's the proclamation that we trust God for our sustenance, that we don't have to be like slaves who have to work every single day. We can trust in the God that created all things, and we can take a day of rest, a day to worship, a day to be with our families, or a day to play golf. If that's what you need to do. So that's the second thing I wanted to point out, is the seventh day principle. Now, there's one last thing. I'm on my last point. If I can find it. Yes. Adam was created at the end of the sixth day. So Adam's first day, first full day living as a human being was what?
A day of rest.
A day of rest. And that illustrates that work is not supposed to be our God. Adam's first day was a day of rest. It was a day for him to be with God, to become friends with God. It was a day for Adam. And we can't conceive of this because we're so far removed from it. But it was a day for Adam to feel what it meant to be in fellowship with God. We get later on, there's a story that God is walking through the garden when Adam and Eve have failed him, and they're hiding from him, and he's walking through the garden looking for Adam and Eve. And they are scared because they failed him. So Adam's first day of life is a day of rest. And that tells us some important things as well about our lives and our relationship with God. When I came to this point in constructing my notes to share with you this morning, I could not help but think about the earth orbiting the sun. The earth doesn't do anything. The earth doesn't have to do anything, does it? It can't help its orbit. Why? Because it's the gravitational pull of the sun that causes the earth to stay in its orbit. That's a picture, I believe, of why Adam rested on the first day. Adam was in the orbit of his Creator. He didn't have to do anything. He didn't have to say anything. He just needed to accept the fact that God created him and that he could be in relationship. And Adam is orbiting because of the gravitational pull of the Creator, our Heavenly Father. Adam is caught in that orbit. But it's a great place to be, isn't it? His first day must have been awesome. He's walking around and God's showing him all the crazy things. Now Adam has no concept, right? He's like a blank slate. And he sees giraffes and he sees, dinosaurs. I don't know. That's one of those difficult questions that I don't really want to try to answer. But Adam he's walking with his Creator. He's talking with him. He's feeling the fellowship with him. He is in his orbit. And there's nothing the only thing Adam can do, and unfortunately next week is my presentation, we're in God's orbit. You don't have to do anything. You're in his orbit unless you choose not to be. Unless you decide you don't want to be in that orbit and you do things that he tells you not to do, or you neglect being in relationship with him, and at that point you're going to be what you see next week. What leads a man to actually kill his brother. And tell me that doesn't happen all around us now. We are filled. In fact, Kathy's going to speak about the first judgment of God when the text says God saw that the inclinations in man's heart were consistently evil, and he wished he hadn't even made man. And so he destroys the whole population with a global flood, which I do believe in. Like I said, it's not meant to be history, but there is historical data there. So just as the earth doesn't have to do anything to be in God in the orbit of the sun, we are created. We are created to be in the orbit around our Creator. You almost don't have to do, I'm not saying you don't have to do anything, but you get my drift. If you want to be in his orbit, you will be. And just like the earth is closer to God and then it swings away, all of us experience that in our relationship with God. There are moments where we feel a closeness with God, and then there are moments when we don't feel. We've swung around. It's by God's ordination that this happens, you guys. I think the earth going around the sun is a picture of how God operates with us. Anyone who's married, anyone who has a best friend, and you live with a best friend for several weeks, where we get on each other's nerves. You know? I love Tanner. Tanner's in with the children. I've known Tanner for 14 years. I love Tanner. He and I stayed together in my little dinky camper before Josh and Audra moved, and I had the best time with Tanner. I mean, I really did. We had a blast. But it was nice to get back here and not have to share the camper with him. You know, it's nice that he's in the next camper and I don't have to, because it was cramped, Well, it's the same way in our relationships with God. And it's the same, I was going to use my marriage as an example. Anybody who's married can tell you, you get on each other's nerves every now and then. And there are also times in our relationships, be it marriage, be it with your children, be it with your siblings, be it with anybody, where you don't have that feeling of closeness, where you don't have that feeling of, oh, I love you so much. My grandmother just died, and I had the feelings of love for my aunts and uncles like I hadn't had in years, because I felt for them. They lost my grandmother was awesome, a woman of faith, a matriarch, and I felt for my aunts and uncles. But I don't always walk around with that. And I felt for my mom especially. And I'm very close with my mom. But you guys get what I'm saying? In our relationships, we don't always have the feeling of intimacy. And then every now and then something happens and boom, we have that feeling of, oh man, I love you so much. I appreciate you so much. That's what it's like with God. There are moments when we feel his presence and we're close to him. And then we swing out. We didn't do anything. In the Protestant faith, we don't teach this. Christianity has always taught a dryness, a desert experience. But I was taught as a young man, if you're far from God, you did something wrong. That's not true, you guys. And there are Christians throughout the centuries who talk about this. The text itself talks about God hiding from us to test us and see what's in our heart. So when you find yourself in that place where you're not as close as you think you ought to be or want to be, don't get all wigged out and bummed. Make sure that you're not doing something that you know is displeasing to him, and make sure you're not neglecting him, because we can all do that. We can get so caught up in this world that we neglect our relationship with God. Right? I do it. You do it. We all do it. The world demands our attention, our jobs, our education for the student. Things demand our attention. And it's easy to forget that we're made. We are made to swing around God. We are made to be drawn into Him, into His gravitational pull. So what we got to do is make sure we're not doing the things that displease Him, and to make sure, and that's why the seventh day principle is a great one. Because if you're busy, if you live your life frenetically, if you have one day a week where you purpose to sit in quietness, to think about God. I mean, just coming to church for many of us is that. It's an opportunity to reorient us, to make sure we're in that orbit that He wants us in. All right. The New Testament in the letter to the Hebrews says, there remains a Sabbath rest for the people of God. So make every effort to enter that rest. It's a little of an enigmatic statement, isn't it? You're supposed to rest, so make every effort to rest. I love that. Thoughts? Anybody want to share? Anybody want to comment? This is the time. Yes, sir. Man, that is awesome. This is your first time to be here?
Yes, sir.
And he's sharing something. I love that guy. Go.
Question. Yeah.
Oh no, don't ask me one that's too tough.
Earlier, and I may have misheard or misunderstood, you said that in the New Testament that we're not commanded to take a Sabbath rest. But you just said also in the letter to the Hebrews that it was encouraged. Is there a difference in encouraging and a command? Is that what we're getting at?
Well, I just kind of made reference to it. The Sabbath rest that the writer of the Hebrews is talking about a spiritual condition. Now, I do believe the seventh day principle carries forward, though. I wasn't saying that my point is just to say we are not commanded to observe the seventh day in the Christian scriptures. Now, you're going to find reference to it in the Gospels, but that's because Jesus is a Jew living under the Old Testament law still. He's fulfilling it. But the point is, until He's resurrected, you can't, in post-resurrection Christianity, we're never commanded to keep a seventh day. But I'm telling you, it's one of the 10 commandments. It was in the creation story, and that leads me to believe the seventh day principle is one that we should observe. I'm just telling you, you're not commanded do not commit adultery. You're not commanded like that. But I think the seventh day principle is important. I think it's good for us. I think when we work, or even if you work 6 days and then you take your seventh day to do nothing but, if I joked around, if I work 6 full days, however many hours a day, and then on Sunday I played golf all day long, that would not be observing the seventh day principle. Because part of the principle is to focus on God. It's to give Him your undivided attention. Now, that doesn't mean you have to do it all day. Everybody understands what I mean, because actually being with family, I believe, is part of it. I think I mentioned that. I think that's part of God's plan as well. So, is that clear, Ethan?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Anybody else? Comments, questions? Share something God spoke to you? Yes, ma'am.
Well, as I was sitting here and you were reminding us of the story of creation, and I'm sitting here and I'm thinking, man, and God knew then, as He is forming the earth and forming humanity and the animals and everything that He's forming, He knew me then. He knew every one of us then. And to me, that is an overpowering thought. The fact that He knew each of us at that point, at the beginning of time, He knew who we were.
And He created all of this for us.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Just as an aside, my work on the planets and Earth and the revolving around the sun makes me wonder how anybody can believe in man-made global warming. It doesn't make any sense to me. If we have these cycles, if the scientists are right and we have these cycles that last. I mean, in my studies, I read a scholar of Egypt, and she was talking about how we have some, and I don't remember what the record was, that Egypt, some thousands, I don't even remember how many thousands of years ago, was completely fertile, grasslands, and then we went, and it happened slowly, but the tilt of the earth, the wobble I was talking about, turned the earth 5 degrees and it became a desert land. And I'm thinking in my mind, I wonder if that woman believes in man-made global warming, because that's in the academy. If you don't believe that, you can lose your tenure. And that's politically charged. It makes no sense to me. But I'm just, what do I know? I'm not a cosmologist. Anybody else? We've been here a long time. I went for longer than I usually do, but does anybody want to share what did God say to you? That's what I think I like to hear. Like Saran did. I didn't mean to discount it.
Sure, I know. I'm just the redhead.
Anybody? Anybody else?
I mean, like, I was just sitting here thinking that, we hear about creation a million times. But whenever you sit here and really think about it, there was nothing. And then God decided to make something. And to us it's just natural to think, okay, well, he made it out of all of this, but how did he know what that was? How did he know what dirt was before he made it? And that just shows his immense wisdom that he has and all-knowing power. I mean, it just seems natural to us to be like, oh yeah, he made it. And we know what it is because we're born into it. And it's just natural to us. But to sit here and think about it, he had to come up with what this was. It's just unfathomable. I mean, I know it sounds like a garbled mess coming out, but
No.
But it's just, how did he even know what to do? It just shows his immense wisdom and all-knowing power. And it's just crazy to think about.
You use the word unfathomable. That's a great word for what we're talking about. To me, it's like a Chinese finger puzzle. And I had it in my notes and I forgot to say it. I'm not an Old Testament scholar. I'm not a biologist. Please don't ask me difficult questions because I don't have answers. I just gave you my views. I have a lot of thoughts. I have a lot of opinions, but I don't know. I don't know that any of us can know, right? If you get me in a private place and you start questioning me, I might come up with all kinds of crazy ideas that I have pondered. But it is beyond us. Yes, ma'am.
It's something I just want to bring up. It bothers me when you have man that tries to mess with God's creation. It's like when he said he gave him time, he made fish, he made animals, he made earth. But when he made food, it was just pure. You could eat it. Now nowadays it's like they put all these chemicals in God's food, and it just creates so much. It just creates a lot of danger to our bodies. And like food, they say we can't eat is something that God created. So that's just telling me you're just adding chemicals to make it, to make it grow fast. And that's the reason why so many people are getting sick now. Because these chemicals are messing up.
I can't disagree with that. Genetically modified stuff is scary to me. Oh yeah, everything.
Eggs, stuff that's naturally supposed to be.
People were more healthy when they lived on the farm and they actually were in control of what they put in their mouths. Yeah.
Something I read a while ago where they were saying there was too much sugar in bananas. And certain fruits that God created, there was too much sugar. Don't eat
bananas, don't eat
And
grapes.
I'm like, this is what God created, and He knows how much sugar we need for our bodies.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden they're telling you now, with the fruits, don't eat
Yeah.
certain fruits because there's too much sugar.
Well, and I think that's going to be if you are inclined to have diabetes or something like that, and you already eat sugars in other ways. So, but listen, I think a banana is pretty good. I love grapes. Yeah, Richard.
Just when you talked about God when He made all things and that it was good, it's my belief that in the end, He is going to recreate and make all of this that we see now that is trapped in sin, but that He's going to make it all good again. And it's going to be without stain and without sin. And to me, that brings me joy, because I know that He has a plan for the earth. And it's not for us just to leave and, come God so we can leave. He's coming back. And He's going to make everything that's been done that's wrong, He's going to make it right. And this earth is going to be what it once was, what He meant it to be from the very start.
A new heavens and a new earth. Yeah.
When you were
That's
talking,
hard to conceive as well, really. Yeah.
when you were talking, I don't remember what you were talking about, but it came to me how precious and special we are to God, that He made us above any. I mean, He didn't go out there and make it somewhere else. He gave it to us, and He made us because He loves us that much, and that's what came to me. His love for us, that He created us and created this earth for us. That's what I thought about when you were talking. How special we must be.
One last thing, I was talking to a friend of mine, well, I say friend, an acquaintance, someone that believes in evolution, and they made a statement about the Big Bang Theory. I said, well, the Big Bang was God said, let it be.
Yeah.
That is the bang.
It really is.
Well, and that, I mean, look, that could be. I don't know.
And she said, well, I never thought of it that way. I said, well, I don't know what it sounded like when God said, let there be light. It could have been a catalytic, cosmic size boom. Who knows? I don't know. We don't know what I don't know what his voice sounds
When He
like.
opened His mouth, it was the Big Bang.
Exactly.
If you want a big bang, there you go.
Yeah.
I actually had a T-shirt as a teenager that said, "I believe in the Big Bang Theory. God spoke and bang, it was."
Yeah, that's right.
All right, well, let's stand and, what?
Keep going.
And, Saran,
Yes, sir.
can you close out in prayer? Would you mind?
Of course not.
Okay.
Oh, Father, thank you so much for your awesome power and your authority and your faithfulness and your grace and mercy. As we remind ourselves of the creation of the earth and all that's in it and humanity. And Father, just press upon us this week to take time for you and to take time to fellowship with you. And to enjoy your presence and enjoy your company. Because you desire that from us so much. And we should desire that. That should be more important than anything else in our lives, is the relationship that we can have personally and individually with you. And Father, we thank you for the creation of this earth and all the provisions that you've provided for us. And carry us through this week. In your name we pray. Amen.